What is up, everybody? Week number 12 of the high school football season here on NLL Weekly. Chris Schmidbauer, Dan Naraki, thanks so much for spending some time with us tonight here on YouTube. Of course, if you don't catch us live, you can check out the podcast, Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, and Podcast Addict, where you can find the show. Of course, also all of the broadcasts are archived on our YouTube channel, NLL Weekly. You can check that out. All of them are going to be up there from week one all the way through. Huge marathon show last week. We had every coach except for Tyler Swery from Napoleon on to talk about their first round playoff matchups. We went 4 for 8 last weekend with one surprise win, one surprise loss. We're going to talk with our good buddy Justin Keller about those games here in a second. But overall, to be 50% after week one, kind of where we assumed we would be. I think we assumed that all of the top seeds would win, the lower seeds would not. We had one top seed lose. That was Clay. We had Napoleon with the shocker of the weekend, winning 49-0, the 13 over the 4. But overall, I thought a pretty good representation from the teams that we thought would represent themselves well. And then, again, Clay a surprise, Napoleon a surprise, but you still saw, I guess, some good and bad last week.
And I think that also speaks pretty well for the league too, to get 8 of 11 teams in, even in this expanded field. That's still pretty good to be able to get the majority of your league in, and then still come away with the top third of them playing into this second weekend. So I think, the Northern Lakes League of showing off very well here in the beginning. And it's not like anybody is getting an easy go of it here in the second week.
Lord, no, not certainly not the Whitmer Panthers, which we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about that game, as that's probably the most consequential one of the weekend coming up, with the Panthers taking on Lakewood St. Ed's this Friday night at Whitmer Memorial. But we've got a lot of stuff to get to. But before we do, I want to say thank you to Car Stereo One. Car Stereo One specializes in providing high-quality audio system speakers and accessories for your vehicle. They also do remote starters, window tints, speakers and subs, bikes and boats, custom interiors, vehicle wraps, and custom wheel kits as well. Make sure you check them out online, carstereo1, the number 1.com. You can give them a call, 419-474-5553, 3120 Central Avenue, their physical location. Make sure you take their car, and Parker Lopez and his team, thank you so much for sponsoring this podcast each and every week. So we want to thank him before we bring in our good buddy to talk all things about the Northern Lakes League and the way that the playoffs have gone. And Justin, first off, as always, thanks for doing this, because your mind is a little bit sharper as far as the football side of things than mine is for the most part. But when you look at last week, clearly the two that jump out immediately as far as surprises is the Napoleon win, 49-0 on the road, the 13 beating the 4. And the other side of things, Sandusky upsetting Clay 35-28 at their place. That's the 11 beating the 6. Of those two, does one surprise you more than the other?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I think both, when you look at the Napoleon score and you think about the league that they're in and the schedule that they have, being a Division IV school competing against Division II and III schools, I think it puts them at a little bit of an advantage. Or maybe not even an advantage, but when you just look at their schedules, and they were, obviously the lower seed, it's not a surprise that they won. We've been pretty high on Napoleon all year, and that really didn't come as a surprise. And then the Sandusky Clay, that, I guess the score doesn't shock me too much. After going back and watching that game, I was a little surprised with a few things, and we can probably touch on that later, but wasn't surprised with the score. It's really tough to beat a team twice. That's a talented Sandusky team, and to have to come back and play them again in the first round of playoffs, that's not easy either. So, I don't know if I can pick one over the other. I would say either of them aren't a surprise. Going into it, if I had to pick, I probably would have picked the other way, but not surprised by either victory.
The Fremont Ross one is not shocking in the sense that they won. And I agree with you, because anytime you play up against the level of competition that Napoleon has played up against all year, you are better prepared than most Division IV teams. There's a reason, I think, why Napoleon likes playing in the Northern Lakes League. However, to not only go on the road and win, that's strike one to me of, wow, that's impressive. But then on top of it, to basically have a running clock in the second half against the 4 seed, that's really unheard of these days. And granted, I would argue that the disparity in the lower divisions probably isn't as vast as what we see in the upper divisions of the state. Unfortunately for Napoleon, they're kind of in that middle ground, but they are not a traditional 5-5 team, which we talked about. Mm-hmm. And I look at that game, and the fact that you have the running clock in the second half is just kind of mind-blowing in the sense that I'm guessing people at Clearview are going, what the heck is going on, and who is Napoleon, and where did they come from, kind of thing, because there's very many people do not go in there expecting, like, yeah, you could have a close game, but I don't think very many people go in there expecting to see a running clock against their team at their home place in the first round of the playoffs like that.
No, yeah, the score is definitely a surprise, like you touched on, but the fact that they were able to win, again, doesn't come as a huge surprise to me, but and I lean a lot on Drew with a lot of the Drew Pastor's website for a lot of this stuff because he's able to add some math to it, and we don't get to see all these teams all the time and watch them in as much as to give an expert analysis on some of these games. But when you look at Napoleon's ranking in D4, they're number 30, ranked number 31 in D4, and Clearview was 56.
Okay.
So based on the record, so that's where we kind of had them ranked within their division. So they were 20 spots higher going in, and a lot of that's determined on their strength of schedule and whatnot. So again, even based on that, again, not surprised at all by the win, but the margin of victory definitely comes as a surprise.
The Clay game, as we said, shocking in the sense that you assume that Clay would win that game, all the momentum they have coming out of week 9. I'm going to throw 2 questions at you. One, this is not in Clay's control, so I don't want to make it seem like there was anything they could have done to avoid this. But in your mind, does playing a team like Rogers in week 10, then you go into the first round of the playoffs, you, in a way, probably relaxed a little bit or celebrated a lot going into that week 10, knowing who you had on the docket. But to try and lock back in, and I'll reference back to 2017 Whitmer when you beat Central Catholic, and then literally the rest of the way, pretty smooth sailing, not a lot of big tests that you had to pass. And then all of a sudden you get into the playoffs. Granted, Whitmer was banged up, which didn't help. But to try and lock back in mentally after, even if it's just a week off mentally, to try and lock back in against a team that you know is coming, who you've seen before, who is much better than the last time you saw them, to try and lock back in mentally is not the easiest thing for 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids to do. And I look at that game and I go back and I wonder, are they a victim a little bit of the fact that you kind of had a cupcake in week 10 and it really didn't mean anything and you were able to get healthy and all that stuff, but you basically had 2 weeks of celebrating until all of a sudden it's like, oh man, this isn't over yet.
Well, the one thing I never liked is when we were in the track and we always played Central week 10. So I never was a big fan of that. I mean,
right.
Obviously you're not going to get locked in more than playing for a league title against Central, which happened every year, but especially when that was week 10, because I felt like it's more of an opportunity. I felt like it was more of an opportunity for Clay. Kind of like what Whitmer's gone through, not to that extreme, but
sure.
To have that week 10 where you're able to rest some guys, refocus, start game planning for your next potential opponent, which should have been pretty easy because they played Sandusky, even though they have gotten better throughout the year. Mm-hmm. But I think it's an opportunity to rest guys and make sure guys are healthy, save some legs. And again, speaking to that point too, and you brought it up before on the podcast about 16 teams and going to 12 and getting that bye. And
yeah,
it's funny, like I've just been curious. So I've been asking some coaches, and I've even asked some players in the hallways, like just randomly, like, what would you rather done? Would you have had a bye or play John Marshall? And it's surprising. Most of the kids said probably a bye. And I've had a couple of coaches says, no, we need a game. We gotta stay focused, But I tend to side with the kids a little bit on that. And so again, not comparing Rodgers to a bye, but when you're talking about, lack of focus, not to mention Clay. This is the first time they've ever hosted a
correct.
So they had a lot to play for, and they knew Sandusky was going to give them a challenge. It wasn't like Sandusky snuck up on them where they beat them before. Like they knew that they were going to give them a challenge. So I don't think other than having to play a really good team for the second time, that was their misfortune more than I feel playing Rodgers week 10.
The other thing too, and I guess it's not so much of a question as a statement, was Mason Heinzel probably played the worst game that he's played in the course of 3 years. And to have it on that stage, there are nights where you just don't have it. And you hate that that's what ended his high school career. And you hate that that's how his time as a Clay Eagle ended, because he had been so fantastic for the better part of 2 years and probably 2.5 years, if we're being 100% honest. Mm-hmm. But literally, you could not have picked a worse time to have the worst possible game that he has had. No, credit Sandusky, because I'm sure they threw some wrinkles in defensively that Clay had not seen the first time around, and they probably noticed some things on tape, that tendencies and all that stuff that you get into as the season wears on. But even still, we've seen a lot of teams game plan to figure out how to slow down Mason Heinzel, and not a lot of them have figured it out. To have that game be the worst game is just really unfortunate timing for him.
Yeah, he looked human. He looked like a high school quarterback.
Yes.
Hats off to Clay and what they did this year, and what Mason Heinzel was able to accomplish during his career at Clay. But you said credit Sandusky, because the one thing they did a great job of is they didn't let him get out of the pocket too much. If he was going to run side to side, he was stepping up in the pocket and getting out. They were not just going to let him escape outside the pocket unless he came up underneath first. Now, again, rewatching the game on TV, it was hard to see what the defenders were doing. But I'll tell you what they didn't do is they didn't run up and try to anticipate a run by Heinzel. They stayed they locked onto the receivers. They weren't going to run up and come up and try to make a tackle. They were going to stay with the receivers and not get beat over the top. And they did a great job of doing that, which is why they two of the picks, I think, came because for that reason. The other one, Heinzel did get out of the pocket. And he forced one. I think that might have been the pick six. But Sandusky did a phenomenal job, again, of trying to flush him, keep him in the pocket and have him flush inside as opposed to getting to the edge.
Before we get to the other winners, the other three losers, Bowling Green loses to Defiance 38-0. Fremont Ross, to their credit, did make the game against Medina Highland more of a game, longer than most would have thought. I know when we looked at the score on Friday, and at one point it was only 14-7, you kind of wondered, maybe Chad Long wasn't wrong about how his team was going to fare. And then I think was like a quarter and a half in at that point. Ends up being 52-7. We knew Medina Highland was good. I think Fremont Ross held with them for longer than maybe some would have thought. So in some respect, you have to tip your cap to Fremont Ross. Nobody's happy with a 52-7 loss, but to have the 2-15 and literally the 15 push you as much as Fremont Ross pushed Medina Highland, kind of impressive. And then, of course, the other one being Findlay losing to St. Ed's on the road. Not surprised by that score, although I had a couple of people say to me, and this is why I think when we talk about trying to be more than the average high school football fan, when we do this show, you and I do a lot of deep dives on teams, records, schedules, those kinds of things. people are going to look at 5-5 St. Ed's and say, well, they're not very good this year. No one who doesn't click on St. Ed's to figure out what that schedule was clearly has no idea what they're talking about, because 5-5 on that schedule, you could put a lot of teams in this region 1 on that schedule and they don't win 2 games, let alone 5. But the other part too is when you look at Findlay, they're 4-6, and people are going to say, well, the gap record wise isn't that different between those two. And on the surface, that's correct. It's only obviously a game difference. But we talked about this after the Findlay game when Whitmer played them. That Findlay team did not play like a team that was 4-6. That was a Findlay team that, for whatever reason, felt like, at least in the Whitmer game, that they were not all on the same page. Execution was poor. Body language at times was poor. And the mistakes that were made, even though they could make plays and could do things and move the ball offensively, we talked about how much we like Jacob Ragland, but he can't do everything. He certainly couldn't save the Whitmer game. And I don't feel like 4-6 is really representative of how Findlay was playing at the end of the season either. If you're going to be honest, that was a Findlay team that looked like maybe they would have won 2 ball games all year, not a team that would have won 4. So there's definitely a little bit of, I would say, just misinformation, but also kind of some misdirection just by looking at the records. To look at those two side by side, totally understand why the comparisons would have been made. But once you dig a little deeper, you can find why that was a 48-0 win for Lakewood St. Ed's.
Yeah. First thing I'll just touch on real quick is Ross. I mean, you credit him for them competing early in the game, but I'll take it a step further. How about just the job Coach Long did to get them?
Correct. Yes.
Finish 4-5 after they start the start that they had. And, and I haven't seen them since Whitmer played them, but it definitely could not have been the same team that we saw when Whitmer faced them. So credit to Coach Long for the job that he did, just to even get there and turn that season around and end up 4-5. As far as St. Ed's goes in their schedule, I misspoke on the air Friday night because I said St. Ed's has 5 losses. All 5 of them could be state champs. And I misspoke because I forgot or didn't realize that Hoban is D2 now.
Yeah.
Is D2, not D3. So Massillon, they lost to Massillon and Hoban. And one of those two, my guess is Massillon, if I had to bet, is going to be a state champ. But they'll face each other at some point. And, the Kentucky team, they're nationally ranked in the top 15, I believe. Who am I missing? Glenville, Division 4, Glenville. They got to be one of the odds-on favorites to win that division as well.
And then Moeller was the other one.
And then Moeller, who's the top-ranked team in the state. And of course, according to Drew Pastor's power ratings, it's Moeller, Massillon 1 and 2. So just to put that in perspective.
Yeah.
So, they definitely have not had an easy schedule, especially with the injuries that they've sustained this year. And speaking of injuries, I was informed today that I believe Eckleberry did get hurt in that.
Oh, okay. Well. Okay.
And, I did watch a little bit of that film. I'm not close enough to, see anything happen, or, I wasn't really watching it from Findlay perspective. I was more watching St. Ed's defense, but I was told he did get hurt in that game. And the one thing I will say is I was a little surprised that Findlay, it was a blowout, but they were able to run the ball a little bit on St. Ed's.
Okay.
So that was good to see if you're a Panthers fan as well.
The other 3 teams that win, Perrysburg, Anthony Wayne, Whitmer, all of them blowouts, all of them running clocks in the second quarter on Friday. There's really not a whole lot that you can say about those games that really takes any kind of meaningful or deep thought, because we had talked about this on the air Friday. It was so funny. Dan and I ran into Coach Winters on the way out of the building on Friday, and he had said, I've never had a less satisfying win in my entire career. And we kind of heard that with the sarcasm at halftime when he talked with Dan, and he said, quote, well, I guess I should thank the state for this. But you look at those 3 games in particular, and what jumps out to me immediately is, who are we doing this for? And that was the question that has rattled around in my head since Friday, in particular with what we witnessed at Whitmer Memorial last week. When you look at John Marshall's roster, maybe 45, 50 kids on the roster. I don't think they traveled with that many. It probably was low 40s at most.
Yes.
John Marshall's punter gets hurt on the second punt of the game, and they don't have a backup punter. So now they're asking the quarterback, D'Angelo Taylor, to quick kick, something that he probably has not done all year. And Ken Winters did some things that we know that Ken has been really good about not trying to rub teams' faces in some of these blowouts, but probably went further than we've seen him do in some of the other games this year, because there was just no way that John Marshall was going to compete with Whitmer. From what I understand from Anthony Wayne Cleveland Rhodes, the Cleveland Rhodes coach asked Andy Brungard if he was okay to start a running clock in the second quarter. I don't know much about the Perrysburg Medina game, but clearly that was lopsided. So I ask, and I know we've talked about this, and we can get into the benefits or the proposed changes we would make, but really, if the argument is, the state's argument is, well, we give other teams a chance to get into the playoffs, I guarantee you, if you asked any of those John Marshall kids, they don't want to play that game last Friday. I'd be stunned if there were more than 5 kids on that team that were like, yes, we totally want to play this game.
Well, I will say a couple of them played like it. Taylor, the quarterback, none of them.
He was good. Yeah.
But speaking of Taylor, we saw him at halftime, if you remember. Remember, he was walking with Sean Flemings, athletic director. He was walking on the sides, and we kind of walked past him. And I was told that of course, they didn't bring a trainer.
Yeah. They
didn't bring the athletic director, didn't come, nor the principal. But as Sean was walking with them, they were just having a conversation, and Mr. Flemings had nothing but great things to say about the young man. Said he's a really nice, polite young man, and he's asking him questions. And he brought up the fact that Taylor brought up the fact that the athletic director didn't come, or the principal didn't come, and Sean says, well, is your athletic director here? Because Sean didn't think he was there, and he goes, no. He goes, he's our offensive coordinator.
Right, I heard that.
So he's the athletic director and the offensive coordinator doesn't show up to the game. So just to make your point.
So then the next question would be, okay, if the argument is, which the cynicism that we've heard around expanding to 16 teams in each region was, well, it's for bigger gates. It's to get more money for the state. And anybody who saw any video of the game at Whitmer on Friday, John Marshall maybe had 10 people come, and we looked across the way, and that's not to denigrate John Marshall. Like, I'm not picking on them.
No.
That's not the point. The point is, the argument is to make more money. Well, I would argue that we probably made, or Whitmer probably took in less money at the gate than they did during the regular season for the games against Northview and the game against Springfield. And I go back to the point of, as I said at the beginning, who is this for? Because the kids, I don't think, wanted it. Clearly, we talked about administration already. They didn't want it. I don't think Gate was any better than the lowest attended game that Whitmer had. At best, it was equal to that. So what's the advantage to this for the state? And we've never, not that we've asked them directly, but when people have asked, what's the point? You've never gotten a clear answer as to how this is better for everyone in the state and how this makes things better. You can argue about Division I, fine. We know that there's 72 teams and only 8 of them don't make the playoffs. But this wasn't just D1. This is all the way down in D2. We saw blowouts in D3. I mean, to use Central Catholic as a perfect example. I mean, there are games that these teams do not, the lower seeds do not want to play. And what I fear is you're going to start having teams that just say, we're not playing it. We don't want to play it. You're making us play in this. We don't feel like we've deserved a spot in the state playoffs. And I could see in the future where there are some of these teams who say, yeah, we don't want to play it because our kids aren't into it, or we don't want to travel for it, whatever the case may be. But as great as Terrence Claggett, the head coach, talking to him last week from John Marshall, and he did everything he could. You mentioned D'Angelo Taylor. The kids played hard. It wasn't like they just rolled in there and didn't play at all. But you could clearly see there was a huge disparity in talent between Whitmer and John Marshall. And I imagine it was the same thing between Anthony Wayne and Cleveland Rhodes, and the same thing between Perrysburg and Medina. And you can go through every division and point that out. So again, anyone from the state, if you're watching, you hear this, who is this for? Because I don't get the point even more now than I probably would have said at the beginning of the year, because having witnessed it now 2 years in a row, it makes zero sense to me why this is structured the way that it is now.
Well, and again, you know how I feel about it. I'm not a fan of it. But if I had to play devil's advocate, the only thing I would say is, the Whitmer game, as low as the attendance was, I'm sure the state made a nice little profit off that gate.
Because they take all gate, right?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So I don't know how much goes back to the school. I'm sure there's a certain number, X amount of dollars goes back to the school, and then you have officials and that sort of thing that they pay for. But I'd be willing to bet they made money even on the Whitmer game. Just imagine if Clay, I'm just use Clay as an example, and they had a good matchup.
Sure.
On paper, but just imagine if Clay would have won one more game and would have bumped up, and they would have had one of those schools come in.
Yeah.
Well, a school like Clay, who isn't used to hosting playoff games or has never hosted one before, it wouldn't have mattered who showed up at Clay. I mean, they were packing that house. That was a big deal. And I think you have a lot of situations like that, maybe at some smaller schools, to where they're coming no matter what. Where a place like Whitmer, where especially now with 16 teams, that's the expectation. You better be hosting a playoff game. And then, the
you're almost at the point where you better host too, I think.
Right. And then Anthony Wayne, I mean, they're to that point now, and even Perrysburg for that matter. I mean, the expectation for them was to host a game. So, the state may not make as much money, but to answer your question, I think it is about money. That's just my opinion. I think it's about money. And if you look at the timing of when we went from 8 to 16, it was right after COVID.
Right.
And what happened during COVID? Because the state did the right thing, in my opinion, because they had so many teams that had to cancel games, everyone got in. And I think they saw that and they thought, hey, here's an opportunity. And so they wanted to expand to 16. Again, that's just my opinion.
No, and I don't disagree. But this is where, and we've talked about this, and I'm going to bring it up again, but that's why I do feel that the happy medium is the college football playoff model, where top 4 seeds get rewarded for having a good record. You get that bye in the first round. You get a week to get healthy, and 5 through 12 play a first round game. And so you can still have your teams that haven't hosted, like a Clay, host, because they would get to host a first round playoff game. And some of the teams, yes, you obviously lose 4 teams out of the region in each region, but you're still taking teams that might be on the fringe of getting in when it was 8, and now they get in. And you're also going to probably have more competitive games than not. Now, I'm sure the state would probably look at me and say, yeah, Chris, but Napoleon wouldn't have been in. They wouldn't have made the playoffs. And that's fair. And yes, Napoleon clearly proved that they belonged in the playoffs. But my guess is for every one of those examples, there's 10 that I can point to and say, yeah, but what about this game and this game and this game, where those two teams didn't even belong on the same field together. And when we talk about schedules and non-conference in particular, it's one thing to play who you have to play in conference because that's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
But teams like Whitmer, we'll talk about St. Ed's here in a little bit, and we already kind of touched upon their schedule. Those teams, Anthony Wayne, Perrysburg for the most part, you try and bring in 2 to 3 decent opponents. Yeah, you might schedule a team that you're pretty sure you can beat. But usually 2 of your 3 are games that are going to test you to some degree to get you ready for the regular season. Not every coach does that. I get that. But if Whitmer and Perrysburg and Anthony Wayne and St. Ed's and whoever you want to throw in there are actively not doing and scheduling those schools to begin with, there's a reason why, because they don't see the value in playing that game. Schools always look out for their best interest. Schools always look at what's the best value we can get for the games. And every coach has a different idea of what they value, but they're all beneficial to the school in some way. If Whitmer felt like playing John Marshall was a benefit, they would have scheduled John Marshall. If Central Catholic thought playing Lutheran West helped them during the regular season, they would have played them. And to me, the fact that you've never seen these two schools play each other, and a lot of the schools never play each other outside of the playoffs, just speaks to that gap that exists. And yes, it's about money. I get that. But at least the 5 through 12 first round and then the top 4 get the bye, at least in that sense, you're closer to a competitive matchup all the way through versus literally just having what we would argue were, you felt bad on Friday, I think is where we were at. And that's, you should never leave the field. And I bit my tongue on multiple occasions, but even then I couldn't hide it. Obviously I'm not tonight, but nobody left Whitmer Memorial on Friday feeling really good about what just happened.
Well, maybe Cam Robinson.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. He wouldn't have gotten in. But outside of that, nobody left going, man, what a great game. I'm so glad we came to this. Whitmer showed up. They were supportive. Whitmer always is. Washington Local always is. But nobody, I guarantee you, left that and was like, man, money well spent, time well spent. What a great Friday night. If anything, people are like, hey, John Marshall played hard, but man, that was a joke that they even had to come here and play.
Yeah, and from a coaching perspective too, back in 2005, we were 2-8 in 2000. Now, we had been to the playoffs in 2004, 2003, which was my first year coaching, and I believe in 2000 and 99 or 99. And so there was a little momentum there. It's not like Whitmer hadn't been to the playoffs in 20 years or something.
Right.
Because we had been there in recent years. And I'll be honest, I couldn't wait. I couldn't imagine saying, okay, we're going to 16 teams, pack your stuff. We're heading to Cincinnati Moeller to take on Moeller. I would just, and again, we were a program at the time that had been to the playoffs 4 times in the previous 5-6 years, whatever it was. And I couldn't imagine trying to get the kids ready, get myself ready to make that trip. Because again, you're gonna face one of the state powerhouses or a team that's used to being there, and that's not a lot of fun for anybody. And at the end of the day, it is about the kids. And I again, we like you mentioned, Napoleon wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the 16 teams. And I mentioned last time I was on the podcast, Northwood a couple years ago.
Yeah,
10-0, right? And so there are exceptions, but are those few exceptions, do they outweigh the John Marshalls and the Rhodes of the world? Is it, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I hope gets reevaluated in future years because, and I guess maybe it comes out of how successful the college football playoff looks this year, where maybe the state looks at it and says, yeah, maybe this is the better way to go. But you hit upon it, which is for an organization that claims that they're about kids and providing opportunities for kids, this does not scream this is about the kids. And it really does feel as though it's a disservice to some of these kids. And I think you bring up an excellent point, which is for anybody who's going, yeah, but it's fair. Put yourself in the shoes of those kids and go out and make them play a 48-minute game, get on a bus for 2 hours, put yourself in those shoes and tell me that you would want to go and do what the state asked some of those kids to do last week. And as you pointed out, there were pretty high level officials at John Marshall that didn't come to the game. That tells you all you need to know how the school felt about playing in that game. And again, 100% credit to Terrence Claggett and his kids. They played hard. I'm sure the Rhodes kids played hard. I'm sure the Medina kids played hard. But nobody walked out of, in particular, Whitman Memorial, that's all we could speak from, and said, man, so glad that we came tonight. And man, what a great football game. I'm fine with 12. Not my ideal number, but at least it's a compromise. 16 just, gosh, it's really tough. But anyway, off my soapbox. Did want to get to, before we start talking about some of the games, we had the All League honors announced today, and Cardinal Division, Buckeye Division, and I kind of wanted to run through these and just kind of get your take on some of the kids and some of the awards. Cardinal Division, no question, Mason Heinchel's your first-team quarterback. Owen Espinoza is the second-team quarterback. Jay Shannon from Bowling Green, George Eggers from Napoleon are your first-team backs. Landon Eversman and Will Mazies, ironically, a running back. I think they just wanted to get him on there, was the second team. Troy Hazuda, Jadrian Brown, Parker Woods, the first-team receivers. Brody Ostrander, Mason England, and Dalen Salmon from Southview are second team. Hudson Byers, first team tight end. Jackson Mackey, first team or second team tight end. Tackles were Zach Rahm and Caden Miley from Fremont Ross, and Zach Brown from Clay. Navoia Ragan, I hope he's saying his name right. And then Evan Franks from Fremont Ross, Ragans from Bowling Green. Those are your second team tackles. Your guards, Cole Myers from Fremont Ross, Josh Adamczyk from Southview, Hunter Kozolich from Bowling Green, and Mason Troush from Napoleon. Center was Xavier Lopez from Fremont Ross, Dominic D'Onofrio from Clay's second team, and then utility player Trey Rubenstein is your first team. Braden Schultz is second. Place kicker, Clay's place kicker Derek Harmer, first team Bryce Estep from Fremont Ross, and then Mason was player of the year in the Cardinal Division. John Gallius, coach of the year in the Cardinal Division. Nothing too surprising there other than, I guess, making Will Mazies a running back just so he could get on the ballot, which will earn that right. I just find it funny that you can always make those look however you need to make them look. But for the most part, I think fair. And I don't know that there's anybody that I would say got robbed out of anything. I would have liked to maybe have seen Jackson Schaefer from Bowling Green on that list a little bit, but he was hurt the last few weeks of the regular season. Other than that, I feel pretty good about what we saw from first team offense for the Cardinal Division. And then defense, I'll just do first team. Jackson Schaefer is a first team defensive end, which is probably why he wasn't a running back. Marquez Williams from Fremont Ross, George Eggers. Defensive lineman, Leon Carey, Peyton Heschel, Fremont Ross and Clay. Inside linebackers, Landon Dieter of Bowling Green, Colin Greenwald of Clay. Outside linebackers, Hudson Byers of Clay, Trey Rubenstein of Napoleon. Braden Schultz, one of the corners from Clay, Kevin Jones from Fremont Ross. The other corner safeties were Carter Earl of Bowling Green, Jace Freimeyer from Fremont Ross, and Owen Espinoza was the punter. And then defensive player of the year was Trey Rubenstein. So again, nobody there that I would say really didn't rise to the level of the awards that they got. Any of those stand out to you or surprise you at all?
No, I think, I don't know if there's ever actually, and I'm sure you'll get to it, and I'm not sure because I have not seen it yet. But in both divisions, I don't know if there's ever been a more clear-cut player of the years and coach of the years than this year, to be honest. So none of that surprised me with some of those skill guys. I think The Mazies thing is curious. Who did you say? Oh, Schaefer would have been one.
Yeah, but I mean, if he's going to be defensive end, yeah.
And there wasn't, and again, being relatively new to the NLL, any two-way guys, they usually get one side of the ball or the other.
Yeah. Although you did have a couple that I think made their way onto both, but
yeah,
I get it. I think some of those guys were deserving of both. Yeah. Buckeye division, first team quarterback was Grant Kinney. No shock there. Brady Ford gets second team. This was the one that surprised me. Braden Gardner was a first team running back. So, the other first team running back was Joey Morales. Now, not saying Joey didn't deserve it, because I think Joey played hard in the games he was in. Surprised that was where they ended up going, because Nico Wolkowski from Perrysburg was a second team, as was Gabe Gregory. Just with the way that the stats were, that surprised me a little bit, because I assumed that Gabe Gregory probably would have been if I had to swap between the two that were second team and weren't. But really surprised that Joey made it on the first team as a running back. We both love Joey, but I think we would both agree that he just didn't play enough to maybe get first team honors.
Well, it's funny because so wait, when did he came back? Was it the Anthony Wayne game?
It was the Anthony Wayne game. Didn't play a ton, and then played mainly since Perrysburg.
Yeah, so last year just the opposite happened to him.
Right.
Because he was sick, and then it was banged up a little bit. Had the numbers, but I think that was for second team, but nonetheless, had the numbers to be second team, but missed the Northview game and Springfield game.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't play in those two games, which are in the division. So, you have two coaches that didn't see him play. Those are two games that he would have probably had some decent numbers in. And he was snubbed off the list, even though he had the numbers. And this year, just kind of the opposite happened.
Yeah. And maybe that's the makeup call. I mean, this better than anybody.
Yeah, but
there's a lot of politicking that goes on in the rooms for these. It's not this is a straight. There's a lot of, well, if you vote for my guy, I'll vote for your guy kind of deals being made.
Yeah, no, I've been in those rooms before. It gets interesting, but he did play against all the division teams this year, even though, other than the Anthony Wayne game, I think given the limited carries that he's had, and especially in some of those running clocks, he did everything he could. And if the defense gives up some more scores and he stays on the field, I'm sure his numbers probably doubled, in the last half of the year. But yeah, it is interesting because, like I said, last year, just the opposite happened to him. So it is interesting.
Wide receivers, Jacob Ragland, no surprise there. Isaiah Hayward and TJ Hutchin are your other two first teamers. Brody Sweet, the tight end from Anthony Wayne. Baylor Wilkin and Carter Lowe are your first team tackles. Max Grabarczyk and Kyler Koopmans, your first team guards. Owen Palmer, your first team center. Josh Tackett gets named the utility player, first teamer. And then Rayan Farhan was your first team kicker. I don't have any issue with any of the other ones there. Those all seem pretty fair. And I think the only one that I think the closest to spot on that they got, or that the coaches voted, was the wide receiver position, because it would be really hard to name three other receivers in the division that were better than Jacob Ragland and then Isaiah Hayward and TJ Hutchin this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. What I really like too, and again, this is the first I'm hearing of the entire list, is Tackett's being a utility player.
Yeah.
He rushed for almost 700 yards this year, 600 and some, and obviously was such an integral part of their offense. Usually don't see that going to a quarterback, which is kind of, out of the ordinary, but I do like that call. And I'm just going through some of the Week 10 stats right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good call putting him there. He's more than deserving of getting those honors.
First team defense, Billy Kuzno of Anthony Wayne and Zach Schrader of Perrysburg are your defensive ends. Zach Aubrey of Whitmer, the second teamer. Interior lineman, Eric Bush from Perrysburg, Brandon Dempsey from Whitmer were your defensive tackles. Inside linebackers, Kyle Weimer, Joe Cini, none of those surprised me. Napoleon Jemison and Greg Tazinski were your second teamers there. Thought that was interesting. Cassius Kruger, Roman Morrison, and Braxton Mefford. So Cassius Kruger, Roman Morrison from A-Dub, Braxton Mefford from Perrysburg, your outside backers. Your corners were Terry Cooper of Perrysburg and Davion Sanders of Whitmer. And then your safeties were Ben Niekars of Anthony Wayne, Gray Swanson of Perrysburg, Ty Davis of Whitmer. And then your punter was Owen Graff and Rayan Farhan. He was the second team punter because you didn't want to do a whole lot there.
And he didn't punt a whole lot.
No, he did not. Chuck Isom was one of the second team corners just for your sake. But again, same thing. Nothing surprises me. And then defensive player of the year in the Buckeye was Joe Cini. And then offensive player of the year was Grant Kinney. And then Andy Brungard was your coach of the year. And none of those really shocked me either.
No, given the fact Anthony Wayne was picked fourth.
Yeah.
They go undefeated. He's more than deserving of that coach of the year honor. And then obviously with Kinney's numbers, over 1,000 yards passing, 1,000 yards rushing, that's a slam dunk in my book.
And I think we both would agree that Joe Cini was by far, certainly in division, the best defensive player we've seen all year. I don't even think that's debatable. And that's looking at Whitmer kids too. As good as Napoleon was at times, or as good as, Demekus Beach or some of those kids were in spurts. Man, watching Joe Cini play against Whitmer that night, it's really hard to look at him and say, even though it's a 1-game sample size, wow, he's really good. And obviously everybody came away saying the same thing when they saw him play this year.
Yeah, I think he's really good. And we talked about having Bush in front of him.
Yeah.
As well. I mean,
that helps.
It absolutely does when he's taking on double teams and frees him up. But Cini has such a nose for the ball, and he gets downhill so fast. And obviously I saw a little bit before we played him. Haven't seen him much since, but I don't remember seeing him miss a tackle. Like when he's there, I mean, it's a guaranteed tackle. He's a heck of a football player.
So those are your first, second team, NLL, Cardinal, and all Buckeye division nominees. So congrats to those kids, again, on a really well-played season. So let's go ahead and then turn our attention now. Before we do, though, want to say thank you to Victory Auto Mall. If you're looking for a used car, make sure you give Victory a call today. They are the place to go if you are looking for a used car, and they are a buy here, pay here dealership. Victory Auto Mall is a trusted used car dealer, whether you're shopping for that first car or the 10th truck. Again, they provide outstanding service in a no-pressure environment. Make sure you ask for Steve when you head in there, and their top priority always to get you a vehicle you want at a price that you want to pay. Give them a call. As I'm looking for the phone number, give them a call, 419-745-9676. Visit them, 1632 West Lasky Road. As I said, make sure you ask for Steve, or online, usedcardealertoledo.com. So thank you to Victory Auto Mall for their sponsorship as well. So now on to the games that we will be watching around the area this week. We'll start with Napoleon, who is on the road at Bay Village Bay, and they are the 13 seed. Bay Village Bay, I believe, is the 5. So Napoleon on the road again this week. Don't know much about Bay Village Bay. However, if we're looking at NLL teams as they stand, no reason to think that Napoleon can't go on the road and do something similar. You and I felt really good about that Napoleon team. I think your rankings that you pointed out illustrate it even more so. And the fact that Napoleon, despite the 5-5 record going into the playoffs, was still a top 30 team in the division probably tells you all you need to know. I don't know where Bay High School is, but I would say Napoleon's got a good shot again to go on the road. Not saying they'll win, but think they've got a good chance on Friday.
Yeah, if you again, just going back to my buddy Drew Pastor, he has Napoleon projected to win by 8 points in that game.
Okay.
I was trying to look here. Bay didn't have a overly impressive win last week over Cloverleaf. And the one, the Blade came out today with their summaries of the upcoming games this week. And, Napoleon's averaging 30 points of offense, only giving up 20 points. Bay, their offense, they're scoring 22 points a game, giving up 17 on defense. And if you look at it, it's funny. It's almost like a much smaller scale. What we're talking about with St. Ed's when you talk about Napoleon, right? Just because of their schedule, but obviously teams across the state aren't probably overly familiar with the teams Napoleon lost to like we are with the, perennial powerhouses that Ed's lost to. But it's the same idea, which I think is why Drew Pastor has them favored by 8 points. But I think if Napoleon's able to stay healthy, that with Eggers is over 1,000 yards rushing this year, and then Espinoza, which I don't pay much attention throughout the season to the I look at the stats, whatever. I haven't spent much attention to the Cardinal division, but 1,800 yards this year and 13
he gets lost a lot.
Yeah, and
in the
I
shuffle.
was really impressed watching the Anthony Wayne game. I caught that one on television, but and I thought he was pretty good. But man, 1,800 yards and that just through the first 10 games. I don't know what he did last week. So
he unfortunately, he unfortunately is kind of a victim of the roster because everybody talks about Trey because he's going to Kent State. George Eggers came on so strong at tailback, but Tyler Sweary multiple times when we interviewed him earlier in the season kept going back to how good that Owen Espinoza was for their team and really would tell anybody that would listen, don't sleep on this kid. So he's certainly an X factor there as well. Sandusky in Region 6 taking on Anthony Wayne that Friday. Friday as well. Sandusky with the upset win over Clay. That obviously not the way anybody thought it was going to go. So the 11 seed at the 3 seed will probably say a lot of the same things when we talk about Whitmer and St. Ed's here in a few moments. But Sandusky can win that game on Friday. I do think that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like Sandusky has to play a pretty flawless ball game to beat Anthony Wayne.
Yeah, I will. They need to get off to a better start than they did against Clay.
Sure.
When I started watching that game, that first series, and again, I don't know much about that Sandusky team, but when they came out that first series, I think it was that Kai Lately had like a 30-yard run down the sidelines, and then they threw the ball 3 times I think 3 times and punted. And Jason Henlon, the quarterback there, it just didn't look good. I'm like, what are they doing? Like they just first down, they ran for 30. Now they want to throw it around and punt. And it just took them a while to get going. But I tell you what, Henlon's a good quarterback. And he made some big throws in that game on 3rd down. And then that pair of receivers they have, Corey Bonner and Amir Aaron, are really special talents, and they really played well against Clay, and but they threw the ball a lot late in the game. Not want to say late in the game, but to keep that game close, they had to rely on his arm, and he did a great job. Having said all that, going back to my original point, they got to start off a little better than they did against Clay. Defensively, again, we spoke of it at the start of the podcast. It just seemed very well coached and disciplined defense, and and they had to in order to contain Heinzel like they did, and they're going to have to do the same, obviously, to contain Grant Kinney. I would be a little concerned. I thought Clay ran the ball a little more efficiently.
Yeah,
than I think we're used to seeing against Sandusky, and if they don't sure up some of those things. Now, again, a lot of that could have been because they're facing Mason Heinzel.
Right.
No doubt
and what you're
that.
devoting resources to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they probably have to improve their run defense a little bit in order for them to have a chance against Anthony Wayne.
Did want to point out, even though we're an NLL podcast, St. Francis getting that win at Avon Lake. That's their first win in a long time. So congrats to St. Francis. Nobody from our area in Region 10 at all. So Central Catholic, the only one that's left in that. And then Defiance, I guess, if you want to clarify them in there at Cleveland Benedict, and then Richland Revere at Central Catholic. And then we'll get into Region 1, and that is where Whitmer and Perrysburg are. Perrysburg's going to get Berea Mid-Park on Friday. Berea Mid-Park ended up beating Lorraine, who was the 6th seed, on Friday. And I would imagine that if you were going back a week or two ago and you asked Ken Winters, would you rather be the 2 or the 3, knowing the way things fell and knowing the way the first round played off, I'm sure he'd probably have rather have been the 3. But Perrysburg's going to get the pleasure of Berea Mid-Park coming to Perrysburg on Friday night. I don't think the Jackets will have too much of a problem against Berea Mid-Park based off of record, based off of just kind of looking at who Berea Mid-Park beat and who they lost to. They do have some decent wins. Obviously, Lorraine was 9-2 going into that game, or 8-2 going into that game. You had Olmsted Falls, who was 8-3 that they beat earlier in the year. But against winning teams, they did not fare very well for the most part this season. Would likely think that Perrysburg will win fairly handily on Friday.
Yeah, they're projected to win by 13. I did look at it.
It feels low, doesn't it?
A little bit, but
yeah.
I will tell you this. I did look at so Berea has played 5 teams that are playing in week 12. So they faced 5, and I thought I made a note of it somewhere. Yeah, so Nardonia, Strongsville, Avon, North Ridgeville, Olmsted Falls. All of them on their were all on their schedule. So they beat Olmsted Falls, lost to the other 4. But again, they played 5 teams this year that are playing in week 12. So that tells you a little bit about their strength of schedule, which is probably why that projection is a little closer. And
sure.
And again, talking about misleading scores and results. Lorraine was 9-2.
Yeah,
not the same Lorraine team we saw in 2007.
No.
Sure. So 9-2, but not a very impressive 9-2 record. So that's a little misleading in itself. But I think Berea Mid-Park, they did have a pretty tough schedule. And if you look at their results, it's funny. They like hit a wall. You know, they played Nardonia, who's 9-2. Like I said, they're 9-2 now, playing this week. They lost 28-35. And I have to imagine it's a pretty good Nardonia team. They lost to Avon Lake 36-35, who St. Francis beat. So and that's a quality opponent there. They lost to them by a point, and then they lose to Amherst 60-41, and then I don't know what happened offensively. And then they went 2 games in a row where they scored a combined 14 points. One of them was to Avon, so I understand that. Another one was to Midview, and then they picked it back up again towards the end of the year, and with a big win against Olmsted Falls, who's also playing this week. So kind of a weird record. When you look at their record and the teams they beat and the points they scored, it just obviously, I don't know if there was some injuries there or what.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, their offense is scoring 26 points a game. Their defense is giving up 29. Obviously, the Amherst and the Avon game didn't help that number. But I don't see Perrysburg having much of an issue just based on some of the opponents that they played, some common opponents that we can compare to. I wouldn't be surprised if that's 28 to 30 points.
Sure. And then, of course, the game that will be on Friday, Lakewood St. Ed's coming to Whitmer. St. Ed's the 7 seed, Whitmer the 2 seed. A lot of people not giving Whitmer much of a chance on Friday. Understand why that is. But let's go ahead and because we could easily make the case as to why St. Ed's can win that game and is favored by 20 points, according to Drew Pastor and Fantastic 50. But what is the case for why Whitmer can win that game on Friday in your mind?
Well, I think the one thing that's crucial, and I think Whitmer can do a good job of eliminating explosive plays. We talked about their back half being so solid this year. They're sure tacklers. They got a lot of speed. if they don't fall for a hitch and go or some sort of trick play, I don't see St. Ed's necessarily getting behind them. So in my opinion, what that will result in, because St. Ed's is going to move the ball. I mean, this is not going to be a shutout. They're going to score some points. And if they score early, in my opinion, it's going to be as a result of a 10, 12, 13 play drive, in my opinion. And if that happens, it is crucial that Whitmer's offense stays on the field. Because if they have a quick 3 and out, or it takes a while for them to get going and get adjusted, and that defense has to run back out on the field for Whitmer right away, 7 could turn into 21 really quick, because you got to keep, you got to make sure your defense stays fresh. And again, I think St. Ed's they want to run the ball first.
Yeah.
Make no mistake about it. Thomas Chaney, their quarterback, he set the school record this year in passing. He's, I'm sure after last week, now he's over 2,000 yards. If not, he was at 1956 at one point. I don't know if that was after week 10 or after last week, with 22 touchdowns. If you look, call it balance if you want, but they're 50-50. They run pass. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that they've had to throw the ball probably more than they've wanted to, given the fact that they were 5-5, playing from behind a little bit. So I don't think that's probably where they necessarily want to be, as far as throwing the ball that much. They definitely want to run it. And in my, their top running back is hurt.
Yep.
And I don't know what week that was. I know you talked to the coach.
I think it was middle of the year.
Yeah. So he's out. Having said that, the 3 guys that they roll in are really, really good. I mean, I don't know if Whitmer's seen a back as good as any one of these 3 guys, and they all bring a little bit something different to the table. But they're all very solid, so they can rotate. They can rotate these guys in and keep them fresh. They are big up front. I did highlight one. They got one, which is uncharacteristic of St. Ed's. They're 290, 275, 300, 290. And then they do have a guy that's 5'10", 230, which is uncharacteristic of Ed. But I'm sure he's probably an all-state wrestler.
Well,
he's probably a phenomenal. I'm sure.
And they've rotated some guys around, because I was looking at their starters from last Friday against Findlay, and the player that you're talking about was actually on the defensive line. He started there, and then they moved the one tackle to guard, and then the other backup tackle was the starting tackle. But we'll see how they elect to attack it on Friday, because, as we said, they have moved a lot of personnel around on that offensive line this year.
Yeah.
The big thing for me when I look at this Whitmer team is I'm not sure that Whitmer is as far from the talent gap that we've typically experienced when Whitmer has played these teams in years past. So if you rewind to 10, 11, 12, the gap between Whitmer and those teams was very minimal, if at all. The problem has been, since those years, outside of maybe 2015, the gap has been pretty wide between Whitmer and the top teams in the state. This does not feel like a team that's as outmatched against this Lakewood St. Ed's team as they would have been 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Now, part of that is because Lakewood St. Ed's is not the same team that they were the last 3 years when they've won 3 consecutive Division I state titles. But also, Whitmer is much better talent-wise on paper than they typically are. The biggest question that I have, we've talked about it all year. I have said on multiple occasions, what's Whitmer's best win? And inevitably, everyone would probably say Perrysburg, which, fair. The question then becomes, okay, well, what was Perrysburg's best win? And that's where it becomes a lot more difficult. And that's not to knock what Perrysburg did. You might say St. Francis, you might say Clay, you might say Findlay. But Perrysburg would probably argue, if you talk to Dirk Connor honestly, he'd probably say we really haven't shown how good we can be. And we haven't beaten a team that was a good team or that we shouldn't have beat. With all of that said, Whitmer has a golden opportunity to realize their full potential on Friday. And will they? I can't say. And that's the hard part with this group. And I think you would agree with me where we've been waiting to see that breakout party all year. And the closest we got to it was against Perrysburg. And if you're able to do something similar to what you did at Perrysburg, which is patience, that's something that we haven't always seen this year. If you're able to be disciplined, which we haven't seen all the time this year, and you're able to be mistake-free, which is the number one thing that Whitmer cannot afford to do. What did they lose to Central over? Turnovers. What got them in trouble against Anthony Wayne, against Anthony Wayne? They weren't patient on offense. They rushed some things. Those two keys to me allow Whitmer to possibly win this game because I do feel like they can move the ball. And you can agree or disagree with me, but this feels like a Whitmer team that if you get after the first quarter, and let's say end of the first quarter, it's 7-7. This feels like a Whitmer team that if they get out of that first quarter and they're in the ball game, you're going to be in for a ball game the remainder of the game. Like, it's not going to be a situation where if Whitmer comes out of that first quarter and they're tied and all of a sudden Whitmer's going to just wave the white flag and quit. I believe that what kept Whitmer in that Perrysburg game was they got out of that first quarter and it was a ball game. If that happens, Whitmer will be in the ball game, but it's about the start and it's also about being able to be patient and not turn the ball over. And I think they're more than capable of doing that. The question is, will they? And I believe it's very possible. And I believe that's what could lead them to the win is they can do all those things because we have seen them do it against Perrysburg. I'm not saying Perrysburg's as good as St. Ed's. They're not. But that's the closest thing we've had to a perfect ball game from Whitmer this year. And I hope that they're going into this matchup with that same thought process of we've got some wrinkles. Every team does. But we're going to stay committed to and be patient with the ground game. We're going to be patient with and not panic if we go down a score early where we've got to throw it all over the place. And we've got to, you can't, as you said, you can't leave the defense on an island and make them play series after series after series without much of a break at all. And that's where I think they could hang their hat as be patient. I think they can run the football. If you look at size-wise, Whitmer does not normally have an offensive line that can match up size-wise with a team like St. Ed's. Is it exact? No, but it's pretty darn close. Same thing along the defensive front. It's smaller than it typically is, but I don't know that we've had a group of linebackers this deep in a while. Are they super talented all over? No, but they're all solid linebackers, Napoleon being the most talented by far of the group. I just wonder, can Whitmer not shoot itself in the foot? And we talked about this on Friday. They could play their best football game of the season and still lose. That's very possible. But what I don't, and I hope for Whitmer and Ken Winters and this team, win or lose on Friday, that they come out of that stadium on Friday feeling like they played their best football game of the season. Because, man, the opportunity to not only play Eds, but to get Eds at your place, that does not happen very often during the playoffs. And I imagine Whitmer Memorial is going to be rocking on Friday. I imagine that place is going to be packed to the gills because Eds is going to travel. Whitmer is going to bring everybody they can. It's the game of the week. It's what everybody's talking about. Don't waste this opportunity because you don't get a lot of them. And this would be really terrible if you waste this opportunity.
Yeah, not to mention, it's probably the best game in the area as well. I mean, a lot
Hands
of people are going to want to show up and
hands down
see St. Ed's. I mean, the 3-time state champs are going to want to show up and see them. And the one of the points I failed to mention was, and you've touched on it. You talked about getting out of the first quarter, which obviously is crucial. But I was going to say, keep it close going into the fourth quarter.
That's fair too. Yeah,
give yourself an opportunity in the fourth quarter. And whatever, and by any means necessary. I'm not saying, well, Whitmer's got to run the ball 30 times in order to win this game. Like, that's not the case. They just have to find a way to keep that defense, their defense off. Whitmer's defense off the field and get the game to the fourth quarter. They have enough weapons, whether it's in the backfield at receiver. Brady's playing great this year, to win a close game if they need to. And I think that what I don't know, when I haven't got a vibe from, of course, I'm not going to ask any. I didn't ask any of the players, and I didn't want to. It's not my job nor my role anymore. But just not being around and inside the locker room and on the practice field, what their mindset is of playing St. Ed's, because there's a stigma there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they look at St. Ed's like this, like they're going to play the Green Bay Packers or.
So the report that I got, and I won't say from who, but the report that I got was that the first 2 days of practice, they were super engaged. They're very excited about the opportunity. And this person had said, this is maybe the most locked in that they've seemed all year. Great stuff to hear. And clearly there's hopefully today carried over, and then you got tomorrow, and you're hoping that carries all the way through the week. But I'm going to ask you before we get out of here, because I do think there's a common thread through all of the teams that pull off games like this. What would you say if you had to harness something from 10, 11, 12 when you reach a state Final Four or a state championship game? What's the one thing that those three teams did to get there that Whitmer has to either do or exemplify on Friday night?
Gosh, I mean, we had some pretty talented offenses, but our defense won games for us. And our defense put us in unbelievable situations to score points in those games. And we kind of had a chip on our shoulder. There was a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. And, I think as a coaching staff, you have to create that. And I think the one thing, you hate making excuses as coaches, right? Like, look at the Central game, we talked about the turnovers. Anthony Wayne, it was windy, it was raining, on the grass, and all those things be true. I think as a coach now, I'm bringing those up to the kids. I'm saying, listen, you should be 10-0. You should be a top 5 ranked team in the state. If you take care of the ball against Central, you are just as good as this team. This is a team that does not want to come here. I guarantee you. And I would tell it, and I believe this to be true. And I'm sure they're not, St. Ed's is a seasoned group. I mean, they've been multiple times, and but I'm sure they're not scared to play anybody. But you have to believe in the back of their mind when they saw the seeding and they thought, well, we have to go to Whitmer. You can't tell me they were excited about having to come to Whitmer round 2. You can't. And by any means necessary, I'm trying to convey that to my kid. To my players and say, these guys do not want to come here. You guys should be 10-0. They know how close you are to being 10-0. And I think I just try and create that chip on their shoulder. And also all the other stuff that you hear about from the media, from Drew Pastor. He's got him 20 point. I don't think it would be 20 points unless, it just, the wheels completely fall off early. But I keep reminding them of that and just create that chip on their shoulder, because they are the O-line is, in talking to their staff, and I don't disagree, because I've been around for a long time, is probably the best offensive line Whitmer's had. Size wise, talent wise, it's a smart group. You got running backs that can get downhill. You don't have that Jody Webb back there, but you got guys that can carry the load, and you got 3 of them that can do it. You got game breakers on the outside, and Hayward and TJ, and a quarterback that can get him the ball. I mean, you have all the pieces there, and I think just really emphasizing to those guys how good they are, how good you guys are, and how good you could be. Take care of the football, eliminate the silly mistakes, right, and be able to overcome it. Because in a game like this too, and this would be one of my biggest concerns going in is, when's the last time Whitmer's faced some real adversity?
Yeah. It's been a couple of weeks. Yeah.
And to me, the bigger the game, the more adversity you're going to face. Each round of the playoffs, you're going to face more and more and more adversity because the opponent gets tougher. You're going to have some 3-and-outs. You're going to give up some touchdowns. There's just things that aren't going to go your way more often than maybe in the regular season. And usually the team that overcomes adversity the best, because both teams are going to face it, is going to be the team that wins in a game like this.
I opened last week with talking about that Urban Meyer quote that he had said during the training days with Ohio State about, we're going to push you like you've never been pushed, and how cool would it be if we found something special? And the line that you had said when we talked about it, and I really believe that you hit it right on the head, was, can you be special at handling adversity? Because it takes a group that has an unwavering confidence in themselves when things aren't going right. And it's not easy to have, as you said, that chip, that attitude at all times. And we would probably both agree that we've seen it in spurts. We saw it week 6. We saw it against Southview, I think. We saw it against Dublin Kaufman. And I know those teams aren't the same. I get it. But we've seen it. Can you harness it again? And can you do it once again on Friday? Because if you get past this round, in theory, it's a rematch against Perrysburg. Now, nobody wants to play the same team twice. We've talked about that. But it's a lot more doable after you get through this week. And you've got a legitimate chance at that point to get to the regional final. And that's what we said Whitmer should aspire to. But whether it was round 2, round 3, round 4, you were going to run into a really good team. Mm-hmm. Whitmer, unfortunately, drew the short straw, and it's in round 2. But no matter when you got here, you were going to get here eventually. And if it's St. Ed's that wins on Friday, guess who probably will get them next Friday? Perrysburg. And they're going to have the same questions that Whitmer's got this Friday. So if you're asking me of the two that are better equipped to handle it, I do think Whitmer's the better of the two teams between Whitmer and Perrysburg to beat St. Ed's. But it is by far going to take Whitmer's best effort on Friday. And as you said, to ride the waves that are going to come, because there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be adversity. And can you keep yourself together mentally for 4 quarters, and when the game's on the line, be locked in? And I think they can. Just we haven't seen it enough to feel confident in doing. This isn't for all of the times we talk about 10, 11, and 12. This team, I think, has the talent in a way that some of those teams had. Maybe not quite as good, but I think collectively, like if you were to pool the offensive line, it's probably up there. But we have not seen that same mental edge that those teams in 10, 11, and 12 had. And you could feel it with those groups that when they set foot on the field, it wasn't a matter of if they could win. It was they're going to win. And that starts directly with your seniors, and it feeds all the way down. And I hope on Friday that what we saw at Perrysburg is that same attitude that we see on Friday.
Yeah, you talk about toughness too, and the mental toughness, it's such a vague, obscure thing.
Absolutely.
When you talk about it. And I love what Nick Saban said about mental toughness, and he kind of helps define it a little bit by mental toughness is, what does it take for you to break? At what point? So I'm sure everyone has a breaking point, but what is it going to take for you to break? Again, we talked about, we had a Whitmer player had a towel taken from him, right? Mm-hmm. Got a personal foul for it against Springfield, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not very mentally tough.
No.
If you're going to cost your team 15 yards because someone stole your towel, that's not being very mentally tough, right? You throw an interception or you fumble the ball, is that going to break you to where you're not going to be able to stay focused enough to take care of the next play, right? And so individually, collectively, is Whitmer going to be mentally tough enough to be able to handle that adversity and not break or blink in those moments.
Well, it's going to be one heck of a fun game on Friday. Again, 6:30, the Car Stereo 1 Panther Tailgate. Justin, myself, Dan will be there to preview the game. We'll get you ready the first half hour, and then 7 o'clock we'll have kickoff to round 2 of the Ohio High School State Playoffs, the regional quarterfinals, I believe, this Friday night. Excited to see, can Whitmer embrace this challenge? Like I said, at some point you're going to get here, and yeah, it stinks that it's in round 2, but this could have been your first round game. If we're being honest, if it was under the old format, it would have been your first round game. So it's really not a lot different than what you would
go
have
back
experienced.
to at least you got him at home.
Yeah.
At least you get him at home. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Whitmer Memorial will be rocking on Friday night. For sure.
We have not seen a really great crowd there, I would say, in a couple of years. And I'm excited. You and I were chit-chatting about what it was like when Massillon, Washington came in 10 and what it looked like for some of those games. And when you just had the one home playoff game, but there's that aerial shot that you referenced that people have seen of Memorial Stadium from above that night of that Massillon game. And that was maybe the most crowded I've ever seen that place. They were 3-4 deep at the fence. I don't think it'll be that crowded on Friday, but I hope it approaches that because it's going to be absolutely exciting to be there. And we just hope that we can come and talk about another one next week. But again, 6:30 pregame, 7 o'clock kickoff on Q1055 from Whitmer Memorial Stadium. Jut, as always, I appreciate you, my friend. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday. And I know that the next 48 hours for you, just like it will be for me, are going to be analyzing and trying to figure out how this could possibly go down on Friday. And I know we're both in the same boat, as is Dan, of we think it's possible. In fact, I would say we know it's possible.
Yeah.
Just do they know that it's possible? And that's the big question.
Yep, absolutely.
So, all right, my friend, I will see you on Friday. Thanks very much, as always, for doing this.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
That was Justin Keller. He does games with us every Friday on Q1055 with Whitmer and definitely does a terrific job. And Dan, you obviously heard Justin and I opine probably a little bit longer than we originally anticipated. I love that this was going to be our short show and we're almost at an hour and a half, but it really does speak to, and you've been on the sidelines for these games and you've heard directly what's said on those sidelines because you're on them during every game. And I would venture to guess that that night at Perrysburg felt different than some of the other games this year because it felt like that team believed. And you just hope that they can harness that again somehow and take that with them out on the field on Friday.
Oh, no doubt. And especially referring back to that game, and you got through halftime and we got into the second half, and that was the atmosphere. Like there's never been a point on the sideline really this season where it feels like the energy is just gone.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the second half of that game at Central, where things, I mean, you had the whatever happened in the third quarter and then those turnovers, and it never felt like this team felt like they were done. So wouldn't be worried about that as the attitude. But as you guys mentioned, it's going to be the confidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be that swagger. It's going to be whether or not this group knows that they have a game and they're going to go out and play it. And it doesn't matter what St. Ed's is going to present, and it doesn't matter what kind of challenges that offense is going to. The defense is going to go through, and they're going to play their game. And if they can take the field with that attitude, they're automatically mentally right in it.
Well, we will find out on Friday again. 6:30 pregame show, kickoff 7 o'clock, Q1055 here in Toledo. And we do appreciate you guys for listening. Also appreciate you listening to this. Not quite sure if we'll be on for week 13. You can kind of keep your eyes peeled to Twitter. cschmid01 is my Twitter handle. You can kind of keep peeled to that. I'll let you know what we plan on doing, if anything. If not, we will be back for basketball season. That is the plan. And we will definitely make sure that everybody is aware of when we will come back for basketball, if nothing else. But make sure, again, you're with us on Friday night, Q1055 pregame 6:30, kickoff 7 o'clock. With this show, if you missed any part of it, you want to go back and listen to it, we, of course, are wherever you find your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, and Podcast Addict. Those are where you can find us. Or, of course, on our YouTube channel, NLL Weekly. That is where we are each and every Wednesday, taping live around 7 o'clock. So make sure you find us if we're on next week. And if not, make sure that you stay with us into basketball season, because looking forward to talking basketball and hoops and all that good stuff as we enter into the winter, and also some really good hockey teams in the Northern Lakes League. So we'll definitely talk with them as well. So we appreciate you listening. For Dan Naraki, Chris Schmidbauer, thank you so much for listening, watching NLL Weekly this week. We appreciate you all season long, and we hope to see you again in week 13. Again, keep your eyes peeled. CSchmid01 on Twitter. You can find out what we're doing next week. So until then, have a great week. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.